Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Rubin speaking to you from just east of Jerusalem. Today is the 10th day of the month of Tevet, 5782. It's the 14th of December 2021. This coming Shabbat we read the final portion, the final parsha, the final Torah reading of the book of Genesis, Vayechi. And he lived, referring to Yaakov Avinu, our forefather, our patriarch Yaakov, who lived, as we will discover, 17 years in Egypt. Vayechi. It begins with Genesis chapter 47, verse 28, concluding Genesis chapter 50, verse 26. And we'll be talking about Vayechi. We'll be talking about the whole arc of the book of Genesis, what it seems to been, what it's been all about, what it's been trying to tell us, what it's been trying to teach us, what it's been trying to prepare us for. But first, we're going to talk about today, because today is the 10th of Tevet. It's a fast day, and I am fasting, which makes me a little weary, a little tired. In fact, I had a very physical morning this morning. I had to do some physical work in my capacity in the Temple Institute. So it hasn't been a relaxing fast day. It's been a pretty physical one. But the 10th of Tevet is, of course, the shortest fast day of the year because it comes in December usually, sometimes January. And when the days are short, and it's a dawn to dusk fast, but not necessarily an easy fast because you just don't know. A fast, we always say have an easy fast, and we're talking about people shouldn't physically get sick or come down with a horrible headache or any of those ill side effects. But it is one of the 4 fasts that we fast concerning the destruction of the Holy Temple. In fact, this fast, the fast of the 10th of Tevet, commemorates the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem in the time of the first temple, the Babylonian siege. It doesn't have a corresponding connection to the second temple or the destruction of the second temple, as many of the other fasts do. We'll talk about that in a moment. This fast began on the 10th of Tevet, and it lasted for 3 years, leading ultimately to the destruction of the Holy Temple on the 9th of Av, 3 years following. Now, the 9th of Av was also the same date as the destruction of the Second Temple. And we also have a fast on the 17th of Tammuz, 3 weeks before the 9th of Av, which commemorates the breaching of the walls of both the First and Second Temple, of both the First and Second Temple, Jerusalem, I should say, which of course then quickly led to the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the Holy Temple. Now, actually, historically, the Babylonians breached the walls of First Temple Jerusalem on the 9th of Tammuz. However, our sages didn't want to make people crazy or make it too difficult by having too many fasts, so they combined the 2 days into one fast, and that's on the 17th, which again was the day that the Romans breached the walls of Jerusalem in the year 70 CE. And that's the day that we commemorate the previous breaching of the walls by the Babylonians, which actually took place on the 9th of Tammuz. All in all, however, the dates and the time sequence concerning the destruction of both the first and second holy temples lines up in a very eerie way. Of course, there's no coincidence here. And we know, of course, from that the 9th of Av was the day that the spies brought the evil report on Israel, which just gave that day a bad juju. And it's been a day of bad things for the Jewish people ever since. And the 17th of Tammuz was the day that Moses came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the law, only to find Israel dancing around a golden calf. So that day was a tough day for Israel too, and remained a tough day. And so when we fast on these days, it's to commemorate and remember and reflect upon these past tragedies and what led to them, and also to beseech Hashem to not lay down upon us yet another tragedy. And of course, who's the real linchpin in all this? Us. We need to mend our ways, and when we commemorate the destruction of the Second Temple, of course, we talk a lot about the phenomenon of sinat chinam, hatred. It literally translates as free hatred. It's an expression that's escaping me right now in my fast-induced fog, but just baseless hatred. That's the word, and it's a big problem for all humanity, and especially today. I think you all know what I'm referring to. In the social media, it's just the easiest thing to do, to diss people, to destroy people without a thought, because it's just so easy to do. And much of the West, especially the United States, is wrapped up in cancel culture and politically correct culture, which just basically eradicates, eliminates, erases people, erases their presence, erases who they are, their identity, erases them from existence. It's a horrible, horrible thing, akin really to baseless hatred. So on the fast of the 9th of Av, for instance, and the 3 weeks leading up, that's a focus of many Jews, both openly and introspectively, to mend our ways, to not speak poorly of others, to not hate people because they disagree with us or because they see things differently. Certainly not to hate our fellow Jews, because we are family, we're all in this together, and we've seen what hatred can do. It destroyed a temple. Now, concerning the first temple, our sages teach us that it was the three cardinal sins of Judaism, which are murder, illicit sexual relations, and idolatry, which led to its destruction. Meaning these things were, I don't know if they were rampant, but they were occurring in Israel, among the nation of Israel at that time. They hadn't been eradicated, and ultimately it led to the temple's destruction. So on the 10th of Tevet, we might be focusing on these three aspects of things gone wrong. Now, I would venture to guess that the vast majority of the nation of Israel are not murderers or engage in illicit sexual relations or idolatry. So what exactly are we trying to mitakein? What exactly are we trying to correct here, mend our ways? Well, those three sins, which actually were introduced to the world, they say, when Adam and Eve ate of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, which brought death into the world, a type of murder, because before there was no death, which was a form of infidelity to Hashem, because we had a pact with Hashem, which we broke, sort of a sexual, illicit sexual relationship, which also carries into the mythology of the whole snake and all that, and idolatry, because by rejecting Hashem's word, man was sort of, facing another God, as it were. So again, none of these actual transgressions were occurred. Adam didn't kill anybody. And Adam and Eve didn't kill anyone. They didn't engage in any illicit sexual relationship, and they did not engage in idolatry. But this was sort of the seed of all these things. So even today, if I leave Hashem out of my consciousness, if I act in a way that's not mindful of Hashem, that's not inclusive of His presence, then I'm acting in a way that could be a source, a seed, potential idolatry. So I need to focus on that. I need to try to mend my ways. There's always what to mend. There's always what to correct. We are far from perfect creatures. This is the way Hashem created us, and our mission, our task in life is to be forever perfecting and refining and honing our beings, ourselves, becoming more what we were intended to become when Hashem created us. So that is the story of not really the story of the 10th of Tevet, I shouldn't say that. That's my little talk about it. 10th of Tevet, curiously enough, is the one fast that we are told, halachically, we would fast on, even if it were to occur on a Shabbat. And if it occurs on a Friday, we even fast on the 10th of Tevet if it occurs on a Friday. And the fast continues right up till Shabbat. And any other fast, if it were to occur on a Friday, with the exception, of course, of Yom Kippur, because that is a Torah mandated fast. It's a Shabbat Shabbaton, meaning it's a Sabbath of Sabbaths. It supersedes the Shabbat in that way. Any other fast, however, would be pushed off till Sunday, following Shabbat, if it were to occur on a Friday, except for the 10th of Tevet, which does sometimes fall on a Friday. It's not too often, but it happens. It never, however, falls on a Shabbat. So the idea that it might actually be a fast that would be observed on Shabbat is just a theoretical statement. And because of the fixed calendar that we go by today, the calendar developed by our sages some 2,000 years ago, when the Sanhedrin was no longer able to convene after the Roman conquest and the wars, the first revolt in 70, and then the Bar Kokhba in 134, and in 70, the Sanhedrin was forced out of Jerusalem, forced out of the Mikdash, out of the Holy Temple where the Sanhedrin sat, and went to Yavne, then went up north, Sipori, and migrated over the next few decades, and then ceased to be. And from that point on, we follow a fixed calendar, which is mathematically devised to take into account the progression of the moon in relationship to the progression of the sun, or the progression of the earth around the sun, etc., etc. And with the fixed calendar that we hold by today, the 10th of Tevet will never fall on a Shabbat. Someday we may go back to the reckoning of the new moon via testimony of two eyewitnesses at the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. In fact, there are people working on this to this day who are doing practice runs. In fact, this past new moon, Rosh Chodesh Tevet, they set up the torches on this very same mountaintops where the torches were used as signs from one mountaintop to a distant mountaintop to let Jews know throughout the land that the new moon had been declared by the Sanhedrin, and offerings will be offered accordingly in the Holy Temple. And of course, any holidays that would fall in that month, or a fast day or whatever, will be reckoned according to this being the first day of the new month. And so we're working on it. There are many people here in Israel who are working day and night on reviving, resuscitating, and returning to days of yore, the days of the Holy Temple. Parashat Vayechi. It's the final concluding parasha in the book of Genesis. And it comes on the heels of the reunification of Yosef and his brothers. The dramatic story of Yosef and his brothers has pretty much, not completely, but pretty much come to a conclusion. They're back together again. Last week's Parsha Vayigash opened at the height of the tension when the fate of the youngest brother, Binyamin, was up in the air. Yosef was going to keep him as his servant, and Yehuda could not allow that because he had promised his father he would be responsible for Binyamin. And as he's told Yosef, his father will die. His father will simply die if Binyamin is not returned to him, at which point Yosef could no longer bear the tension and revealed his identity. And to make a long story short, happy ending. In a way, because the family's reunited, including Yaakov, they're all reunited, but they're united in Egypt, in a foreign land, not in the land of Israel, not in Canaan. And as Yaakov is leaving on his way to Egypt, when he's in Beersheba, Hashem speaks to him. It says, Yaakov, Yaakov, don't worry. This is part of the plan. You'll go down into Egypt, but in a few generations, your children will have grown into a great nation, and they will leave Egypt and inherit the land that I have promised to Abraham and to Yitzhak and to you. Your children will inherit it. So they go down into Egypt, they reunite, and now the Israelites, the sons of Israel, the children of Yaakov and Yaakov are all living in the land of Goshen, part of Egypt, where it's good pasture land for their sheep. And Parshat Vayechi opens up like this, chapter 47, verse 28. I'm going to read first in Hebrew, then in English. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shva esrei shana Vehi Yemei Yaakov Shnei Chayav Sheva Shanim V'Arba'im Uma'at Shana. Vayikrovu Yemei Yisrael Lamut Vayikra Livno Liosef Vayamer Lo Im Na Matzati Hen Be'enecha Sim Na Yadcha Tachat Yerechi V'Asita Imadi Hesed Ve'emet Al Na Tikbereni B'Mitzrayim. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, and the days of Yaakov, the years of his life, were 147 years. The time approached for Israel to die. Notice how the name changed. Yaakov, Israel, it goes back and forth, and we can't really get into it in any depth here, but there's always a reason for it, why he's sometimes called Yaakov and sometimes called Yisrael. He's going to flip back and forth a lot in this parsha. The time approached for Israel to die, so he called for his son, for Yosef, and said to him, Please, if I have found favor in your eyes, please place your hand under my thigh and do kindness and truth with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, for I will lie down with my fathers, and you shall transport me out of Egypt and bury me in their tomb. Their tomb, of course, is the Machpelah cave, where Abraham and Sarah, and Yitzhak and Rivka, and Leah, Yaakov's wife, are all buried there. Rachel, of course, is buried in Ephrat. Anyway, and then he says, the translation is please, 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 because the word in Hebrew is na, which is sort of, please. But basically, he's calling Yosef in to have him swear to this. Not to do him a favor, but to swear that he will do this. And Yosef says, I personally will do as you have said. So he swears to this, and then he brings in his two sons, Ephraim and Menashe, for a blessing. And they get a blessing from Yaakov. Yaakov actually switches his hands. He crosses his hands over in order to give the youngest the blessing of the firstborn. Yosef's upset by that. Yaakov is very interesting because, of course, he received the blessing of the firstborn, even though he wasn't the first of the two. He and Esau being twins, he wasn't the first of the two to emerge from their mother's womb. And now he's basically doing the same to his grandchildren. And this may especially be what's perturbing Yosef because, Dad, Abba, this really made your life difficult. You sure you want to do this? But Yaakov insisted, saying the younger will be a more numerous nation than the older. They're both going to be great nations. But I wanted to talk about this emphasis of Yaakov, his insistence that he will not be buried in Egypt, that he will be buried with his people back in the land of Canaan, back in Hebron, back in the Machpelah. It says, opens up here. He said the 17 years he lived, and our sages tell us that 17, we know, is the gematria, its numerical value of the Hebrew word tov. Tet being 9, Vav being 6, and Bet being 2. He added up 9, 6, and 2, and you get 17, and that's the gematria of Tov. So they say, taking from that, they learn from that these 17 years were Yaakov's happiest years. And we can figure out why. He wasn't growing up. When he was growing up, he was always in constant rivalry with his brother. And then he had to flee his brother. And then he had the headache of living with his father-in-law, Lavan, who drove him crazy for a good 20 years. And then when he came back to Israel, came back to Canaan, we got the impression, Vayeshev, Yaakov, back in the land where his fathers dwelt, and we're expecting a happy ever after, but that's precisely when we learn about Yosef and how the brothers are jealous of him, and then we learn how Yaakov sends Yosef to check up on the brothers, and then Yosef disappears. Yaakov is told that it's suggested to him that he's dead because he's shown his bloodied tunic, the one that Yaakov had given him, and he's in constant mourning, inconsolably for the next 22 years. So it should come as no surprise that these are the happiest years of his life. He's with his family, he's with all his sons. They're not fighting anymore. They've all grown up. They've survived this famine. They're living in plenty. It's good pasture land. It's all good. There's only one bad thing, only one negative, and it's not Israel. It's exile, it's diaspora. And the fact of the matter is that much, I don't think most, but very much of Yaakov's life he lived outside of the land of Israel. As far as the three patriarchs, the only patriarch who never left the land of Israel was Yitzchak, Isaac. And he was very blessed in that way. And he had the most peaceful life. And that may be why we know less about his doings, his comings and goings, except in a very general way, than either of Avraham or of Yaakov. So Yaakov has these final 17 years, and they're just like great years. He's at peace. He's retired. He has his son is the viceroy of Egypt. That's pretty good. Okay, he's not the president of the United States, but not bad. And his other sons are doing okay. But the idea of dying and being buried in Egypt is so painful to him. It's so unacceptable to him that he, in anticipation of his demise, of his own demise, he calls in Yosef and has him swear that he will make sure that he is buried in Canaan. Now, yes, he wants to be buried with his fathers and with his wife. That's for sure. But he as good as it is, Egypt isn't home. It's not Israel. It's not the land God promised. It's not the place where Yaakov wants his bones to lie for all eternity. It's not the place where he wants his soul to dwell. He wants back in the land of Israel, Canaan. And I find it very interesting that when he actually does die later in the parasha, his sons are all surrounding him. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. After he gives them all their blessing. And it says this when in chapter 49, verse 33, when Yaakov finished instructing his sons, he drew his feet onto the bed. He expired and was gathered to his people. That expression, he drew his feet onto the bed, it's not a common expression. I'm wondering where it appears elsewhere in the entire Tanakh. If so, I didn't have a chance to check this out. I didn't think of it earlier, but after the show, I'm going to check it out. It's certainly an unusual description, and it's certainly not necessary to the narrative. He finished instructing his children, he expired and was gathered to his people, but inserted there is he drew his feet onto the bed. I want to make the connection between that and between this oath that he made Yosef swear to, that he will not be buried in Egypt. Even as he dies, his last act is to lift his feet up off the land of Egypt. He doesn't want that connection. He doesn't want any of his being ultimately to be defined by or entrapped in the land of Egypt. It's a foreign land. It's not home. It's not the place God promised him. It's not the place that he made a pact with Hashem. He made a covenant with Hashem at Beit El when he had the dream of the ladder. And he said, surely Hashem is in this place. And he said, this is the house of Hashem. And he swore that there would be a temple, a Beit Mikdash, on that spot. That's where he wants his entire being to be forever. He doesn't want to have even a speck of dust from his feet remaining in the land of Egypt. So he's adamant about this. And of course, the sons do bury Yaakov in Egypt, in the Machpelah. It's a very, very detailed description of the whole funeral procession, which Yosef had to get the permission of Pharaoh in order to do, with the promise that he would return, and they left their children and livestock behind. Left their children behind. Obviously, they left the women behind, the mothers. And this meant that they weren't going to bolt. They were going to come back. This was the guarantee. This was the insurance. So we've seen hints of it before. As soon as the brothers arrived in Parashat Vayigash, which we read last week, we're already seeing hints that Yosef's supreme role here, second to none but Pharaoh, but really close to Pharaoh in terms of command. And of course, throughout the 7 years of famine, everyone turned to Yosef, and he was the one who laid down the law. He was the one who made the rules. It's over now, and he's having to go more than once to Pharaoh for permission, and he's telling the brothers, this is what you need to say to Pharaoh so that you'll please him. It's not there anymore. His exalted role is fading away, and he knows it. And so, once upon a time, Pharaoh would have said to Yosef, "Go bury your father. I'll send a guard, to help and protect, and after that you do what you want, or certainly, you must take your children, your livestock, whatever." I mean, it's different now. Change is happening, and when he's buried, when Yaakov is buried, and And they return, the brothers look at one another and they realize, our father's gone now. What's going to keep Yosef from taking his revenge on us? They may remember that their uncle, Esav, swore, as soon as my father Yitzhak is dead, I'm going to kill my brother, Yaakov. They may be fearing a similar thing here. Of course, Yosef reassures them once again that this is God's plan. It's all for the good. But some foreshadowing here. Things are going to not be getting better. Things are going to be going downhill from now on in the land of Egypt. And in fact, the fact that they left their children and livestock behind, we will recall in advance, a bit of a spoiler alert here, that one of the things that Moshe and Pharaoh would argue about and throw at one another when Moshe was coming to Pharaoh with each of the 10 plagues was, you can leave, but you can't take your livestock. You can leave, but you can't take your children. So we're already seeing a sort of a prequel to the what we're going to be reading soon in the book of Exodus, of course, to the Exodus, to the 10 plagues in Egypt. But going back just a little bit before we close things up, because we are getting close to the close of our show. Yaakov gathers his sons around him before he died, and he said that again, chapter 49, verse 1, then Yaakov called for his sons and said, assemble yourselves, and I will tell you what will befall you in the end of days, aharit hayamim in Hebrew. The end of days, of course, makes everybody's ears perk up. And in fact, here in this English translation, it's capitalized, end of days. And in Hebrew, acharit hayamim is a phrase with a lot of potency. Gather yourselves and listen, O sons of Yaakov, and listen to your father. And Yaakov then proceeds to give a blessing to each of his 12 sons. And some of the blessings are all out, you're going to be great. Of course, the blessing to Judah is one of kingship, of leadership, as is the blessing to Yosef. And the blessing to others are prosperity or being hard workers, etc., all wonderful things. Some, however, like with Reuven, he says, you're my firstborn, my strength and my initial vigor, foremost in rank and foremost in power. Water-like impetuosity, you cannot be foremost because you mounted your father's bed, then you desecrated him who ascended my couch. This was the incident where it seems that he slept with Bilhah after Rachel died. Bilhah was the maidservant of Rachel, and also the mother of some of Reuven's brothers. It's very foggy when it says that he approached the couch, the bed of his father. It's foggy from the beginning, and what really happened. The most straightforward, I think, interpretation would be simply that, he slept with or attempted to sleep with the handmaid of Rachel, which Yaakov is reminding him here that you're not responsible. You can't be the leader. So that's a blessing, yes, but it's not a very positive one. Shimon and Levi also receive not such a great blessing. I'm going to close up now because we're about to hear the music, but I wanted to say that, the common interpretation is that he lost his mojo at that moment. The Shekhinah left him because God didn't want him to reveal what was going to happen at the end of days at this particular moment. But who knows? We're not at the end of days yet. We may be approaching them. Maybe it's time to look more deeply into these blessings and see if we can learn something from them. Here is the music. Thank you so much for being with me. We'll talk.